Hey guys, so this video is going to walk you through Paul is arrested in Jerusalem. This is the NT4-5 that is dated December 5th. Again, like always, you might be doing this on a different date, and that is fine, but this will give you a walkthrough of the material using the full presentation slideshow. Again, feel free to reorder those however you need to. A word on these videos. I know some of you have been watching these videos and say that they're helpful. Hopefully you're figuring out that you can skip over portions. You can get to the pieces that you want. You don't necessarily need to watch the whole thing. I try to condense a lot of material into these and sometimes get off on sidetracks, but maybe you're watching these as you're doing other things or something. I hope that's the case because otherwise they're going to get really boring very quickly. But again, blue sheet is in your folder as it always is, and that'll give you sort of the rundown of where we're going. And so in here, we have the full presentation slideshow as we normally do, and the pledges are all in there as they are every week. And the slogan is there. I don't know how that it got missed over in the last weeks, but they are here in this one. And the slogan song is also in there. And so all of the normal opening kind of activities are there. The missions update slide, I don't yet know what that missions update will be, but I will make sure that you have that in time for the lesson week. So we'll get to that. And then we have, we threw in some Christmas music since we're in the Christmas season here. And so we have Christmas music going this week and next for sure. So Away in the Manger is in there. That's just sort of a short one. And then we get into the memory verse review questions. What is our key verse? And then from there, we're just going straight to our ship today. And so the ship runs the same way as it normally does. What's the first piece? Giving thanks, and there's the verse, and then what's the next piece? And it's the pilot wheel, and which verse gives us direction. And then what's the next piece? And then it's the flag of God's glory, what teaches us to do everything to God's glory. And then last week's piece was this sail of strength. And so which verse teaches us to be strong in the Lord? And so that was last week. And then this week we're adding a new piece, and that is which verse teaches us that God can protect us. We're adding another sail, and that's the sail of protection. And so which verse teaches us that God can protect us? And this is going to be Romans 8:31. Now, I want to call your attention to the fact that this verse is different than the verse that's in the book. So if you're teaching from the book, this verse will be different than the one that is in the book. The memory verse explanation card is there, and the green sheet is there as it always is. And then the game activity is there. There's no special supplies needed. It's just Bible verse addition. And so you have somebody start off saying the verse saying if. Next person has to say if God. The next person if God is. And you just sort of kind of go through and you just try to go around or point to people randomly. But you're adding words to the verse as a way of repeating it and getting people to say it. Now, included in your folder are going to be the flannel-backed pieces that we've been using if you're using the flannels. The word strips are there. You're going to notice these are kind of boring. They're just simple word strips. And one of the things you'll notice, you may get some that are not laminated. I tried to laminate all of these. I ran them all through there. There was some kind of issue with the lamination. It just wasn't sticking on, and then it'd start peeling and bubbling, and it was just a mess. And so the problem is if I would have laminated all those as they were, some of them might have made it. Others, the backing would have come off. So in some cases, I just ended up pulling the lamination off, and you've just got some card pieces with the flannel backings on them. Hopefully, those will work for you if you're using those in whatever way you're doing that. So after our memory verse, then we do have oceans in there. And again, we've got this ship theme and this idea of sailing life's seas. And so we threw in the song Oceans, because that just seems to tie in well with that theme. And so that is in there, and hopefully that's something that your kids are starting to learn and enjoy having that song as part of it this year. Then we're going to move into our lesson about Paul being arrested in Jerusalem. And as we begin our lesson, you may want to start off just asking some questions to kind of review last week. Maybe ask him what city did Paul go to where there was a large amphitheater. See if they remember what was there. And it was the city of Ephesus. And when the people of Ephesus that had practiced black magic chose to believe in Jesus, what did they do with their books? See if kids remember that they burned their books, right? And everywhere Paul goes, it seems like he's facing opposition. Who's the real enemy that is consistently stirring up trouble for him? Yeah, it's Satan that's stirring up this trouble. And so he's running into it consistently everywhere he goes. Now, today we're going to see some of the things that happened to Paul as he travels to Jerusalem, and then what happens when he gets there. Now, I want to start off, I want to throw some pictures up on the screen here. And maybe you want to ask some kids, what do all of the items on this screen have in common? Well, eventually, maybe they'll come up with the idea that these are all items that protect us. Then you might ask, well, are there people that protect us too? And who are some of those people who protect us, right? And maybe they'll list off some, and you can say, there's firemen and police and teachers and parents and military, and all of these are people that have jobs that protect us. But of course, our best protection comes from God. And today we're going to see how God protects Paul as he travels. And so as we've seen, it's become more and more dangerous for Paul. As he travels, it just keeps getting worse. And a lot of people, they're hearing about Jesus and they're believing in him, but Satan is using people to stir up more and more trouble for Paul because they want to try to stop him from preaching. Now, when Paul leaves Ephesus, he travels from there and he goes up through Macedonia and then down into Greece. And along the way, he's stopping at these churches, places that he's visited before. And as he does, he's stopping and he's spending time and he's encouraging the Christians that are there. Now, his plan was that when he gets to Greece, he's going to sail across and come back to Syria. That's what he was planning to do. And the reason was he wanted to come down here. He wanted to get to Jerusalem so that he could celebrate the Passover there in Jerusalem with the other apostles. But just before he was going to get on board the ship that was going to take him there, they found out that there were some people who were planning on killing him. And so he didn't get on the ship, right? Instead of sailing to from Greece, Paul and his friends, they decided to go by land and they traveled all the way back up to Philippi up here. And then they sailed across to Troas, right? So God protects Paul. He allows Paul to learn about this plot that people have against him. And then he provides another way for Paul to travel. Now, it didn't work out the way Paul had planned. He didn't get to Jerusalem in time for Passover like he had planned. But God still had things for Paul to do, and he protects him and prevents him from making that mistake. And instead, God sends him over to Troas. Now, in Troas, Paul and his friends met with a local church there, and they worshiped together. And afterward, Paul wanted to encourage them and teach them more about Jesus and about what it meant to live as a Christian. Now, you remember back then, they didn't have a completed Bible. They didn't have what we have, a written word that we can go to, right? And so what did they have to help them? They looked forward to hearing from these traveling preachers, from the apostles that would come to town. And so they were excited about having Paul so that they could hear directly from him while he was in town. But Paul also didn't have a lot of time because the ship that was going to take him from Troas was leaving the next morning. And so they made the best use of the time. And Paul stayed and he preached with them. And it said he went late into the night. In fact, he just kept going, right? So he starts teaching. Imagine going to church on a Sunday morning and like you have lunch and then Paul just keeps preaching. And then it gets late at night and Paul just keeps preaching and it just keeps going and going. Now, the room where they were gathered, they were up in the 3rd floor. And back in those days, there's no electric lights. So they're burning oil lamps for light. So it might have gotten a little bit smoky in there. And all these people are gathered in. So it's hot. It's hard to breathe, right? It would have been really warm and stuffy. And Paul is still preaching. And there's this young man named Eutychus. And he went over and he was sitting actually in the window because he wanted to get some fresh air. But he still wanted to hear Paul preach. Well, as it got later and later, Eutychus fell asleep on the window ledge. And it was around midnight. And then let's take a look and see what happens next. It says, on the first day of the week, when we were gathered together to break bread, Paul talked with them, intending to depart the next day. And he prolonged his speech until midnight. And there were many lamps in the upper room where they were gathered. And a young man named Eutychus, sitting in the window, sank into a deep sleep as Paul talked still longer. And being overcome with sleep, he fell down from the 3rd-story window and was taken up dead. Eutychus falls asleep. And before anybody can catch him, he falls out the window into the street below. 3 stories. And when the people come out, they find him. He's already dead. Now imagine how everybody must have felt at this point. But Paul goes running and he runs to where Eutychus is and he puts his arms around him. And God causes him to come back to life. Paul announces to everyone, guess what? He's alive. And after this, they all go back upstairs. They have a meal together. And then Paul continues to preach and teach, and he goes all the way until the next morning. Now imagine how the people would have felt when they saw that Eutychus was healed, even from death. They knew that God could protect Paul in his travels. They knew that Eutychus, who falls out the window, God protects him, and so God is protecting them, right? This is an object lesson for the people in the church there, so that they can learn about who God is. Now, the next day, Paul and his friends are up here in Troas, but they get on a boat and they're sailing. Their goal is to get to Syria. And along the way, they have a few stops along the way. As you can kind of see by some of the arrows that are here, they're stopping in some of these places along the way. And they come eventually down here to Caesarea. That's kind of where they're headed, is down here. And in Caesarea, there's a man named Philip that lives there, and he invites Paul to come and stay in his home. And so while Paul is there, he meets with the believers from that town, and there's this prophet named Agabus. He's a guy from Judea, and he had come because he had a message from God that he needed to give Paul. And so at one point during the meeting, Agabus does something strange. He comes up and he takes Paul's belt off of him, and he ties himself up with Paul's belt. And he says, look, just as I am tied up, the Jews in Jerusalem are going to tie you up and turn you over to the Roman authorities. Maybe as you're teaching this, you even want to have a belt there, and you want to kind of illustrate that as you go through, however you want to kind of teach that. Now, when everybody heard this, they start pleading with Paul not to go to Jerusalem. They don't want Paul to put himself in a dangerous situation. But Paul told them, look, stop. Stop making me so sad about leaving you. Look, I am not afraid. I am willing to be tied up. I'm willing to be arrested. I'm even willing to die for Jesus. Now, Paul says this because he knows that God has been with him, that God has protected him everywhere that he's gone. And Paul knows that God is not going to allow anything to happen to him unless it's part of his plan. And so after talking with Paul, his friends agreed, and they said, look, we want God's will to be done. And eventually, Paul did, in fact, make his way all the way down to Jerusalem. And the Christians in Jerusalem, they welcomed him. And he came and he gave a report to the church about all the work that he'd been doing. And they all praised God together when they heard about all the people that had put their faith in Jesus as a result of Paul's preaching. Now, about a week later, Paul went up to the temple. And some of the Jews from Asia that he had met were also there. These were the same ones who had been spreading lies about Paul when he was teaching in the synagogues in Ephesus. And they began to rile up a crowd here in Jerusalem now. And they said, look, men of Israel, help us. Wherever this man goes, he speaks against our people. He speaks against our laws. He even speaks against our temple. And on top of that, he brought some of his Greek friends into the temple. Now, were any of these things true? No, none of these things are true. But it gets people really mad. And then, look, let's see what happens next. It says, the Jews from Asia, seeing him in the temple, stirred up the whole crowd, and they laid hands on him, and they cried out, men of Israel, help. This man who's teaching everyone everywhere against the temple and against the law and against this place. Then all the city was stirred up. Imagine, this is a big city. All the city was stirred up, and the people ran together. They seized Paul. They dragged him out of the temple, and at once the gates were shut. And as they were seeking to kill him, word came to the tribune of the cohort that Jerusalem was in confusion. So once again, Satan is at work causing trouble for Paul in order to prevent him from telling more people about Jesus. It tells us that they dragged him, they grab him, they physically drag him out of the temple, and then they close the doors so he can't get back in. And it says that once they were out on the street, they were actually even trying to kill him. Now, fortunately for Paul, there was a Roman fortress near the temple, and there were soldiers who were responsible for maintaining order. And when the commander heard that there's a riot going on out on the street, he took some of his officers, he took some soldiers with him, and he went down to see what was happening. Now, when the rioters saw the soldiers coming, they immediately backed off. They stopped beating up Paul. And they said to the commander, he's looking at this when he arrives, it looks like Paul is actually the one causing the riot. And so he gives orders for Paul to be arrested and to be taken away in chains. Now, once they had chained up Paul, the commander asked the people who he was. And they asked the people what he had done. And they all began to shout at once. There were so many different stories that the commander's confused about what's really going on here. And so he orders that Paul should be taken inside into the barracks so that they could question him. And as they were taking him, the crowd becomes violent again. They begin to yell, they kill him, get rid of him. And the soldiers, they literally had to pick up Paul and they had to carry him away from these people who are trying to kill him right there in front of the Roman soldiers. And just before he gets taken inside, Paul turns to the commander and he says, can I say something to you? Now, at this point, the commander's a little bit surprised. He says, well, you speak Greek? See, the commander, he had heard about this Egyptian who had been known for starting riots and for leading this group of terrorists. And he thought that's who Paul was. And so Paul says, no. I am a Jew. I'm from Tarsus. And he made it this strange request. He says, look, can I speak to this crowd? And so the commander thought that was kind of odd, but he allowed him to do so. And so before going inside, the commander gives him permission to speak to the crowd. And once he kind of quieted the crowd down, Paul has this opportunity, again, even in this situation, to share about his faith in Jesus. See, Satan had stirred up this mob against Paul, but God used it to gather a crowd large enough so that Paul can now preach. As we think about this this situation. We're going to pick up with that story again next week. But when we think about where Paul is at, what are some of the difficult situations that Paul experiences in today's Bible lesson? Maybe see what students think as they've heard that story. What are some of the difficult things that they see? Right? I mean, we've got these Jews in Greece that try to kill him before he gets on the ship. And then he gets beaten up by a mob in Jerusalem. And then, the Roman commander thinks he's a criminal and arrests him. But, in the midst of that, did any of these things keep Paul from preaching the gospel? No, none of these things did, right? In fact, God protected Paul. He didn't let anything happen to him that was not part of God's plan. And even though he used these negative events, he turned these into opportunities for Paul to preach even more. This is what our memory verse tells us. It says, if God is for us, who can be against us? Even when things look bad, even when things are going in ways that seem negative, we know that God is still with us and that God is for us. And when we face difficult or scary situations, we can remember that God is for us and that he's going to protect us and that he's not going to allow anything to happen to us as long as we're doing the things that he has called us to do. On the take-home sheets today, you may actually want to cut these in half this week and maybe ask them to fill these out right now, right here, while you have them there at club. Or you can give these to them to take home, however that works best in your club. Some clubs are having a lot of success, just the culture of their club, that kids actually are taking the time to fill these out and bring them back. Other clubs are saying, no, you know what, we're promoting it, we're trying, but it just hasn't caught on. But you might want to emphasize these. You might want to have them do this even before they leave, because sometimes they're willing to mark things down that you could ask them verbally. But the idea is get them to answer these, but then that gives you something to kind of follow up with them afterwards and maybe have some one-on-one conversations with the kids in your club. But the question is, which of these is true of you, right? I know that I've received Jesus. I've not received Jesus. I don't know if I've received Jesus. And then maybe a couple of boxes. I want to receive Jesus, or I want help understanding how to receive Jesus, right? And so this could be a good opportunity here for you at this point in the club year to just maybe use this to spark some conversations and to start asking kids, hey, where are you at? Because that's really the big thing. We've been learning a lot about this God who protects us, this God who guides us, this God who cares for us. But where are you at in that? Have you taken the time to trust Jesus as your Savior? And maybe you want to take some time this week. Our memory verse stuff is a little bit shorter. And so maybe you want to jump in and ask those kind of questions and give a short gospel presentation, maybe call for a response, however that works best. You know your group, you know your culture, you know how you want to present the gospel to kids, to call for a response. And maybe that card is helpful to you in being something then that you can follow up with kids and say, okay, hey, you checked all of these boxes. That doesn't even make sense. What's going on? Where are you at? Let me walk you through the gospel. Let me explain this to you in a way that you can understand it, and try to call for kids to respond to the gospel. With that, hey, I'd love to celebrate with you. Certainly, I pray for you guys. I pray for your clubs on a regular basis, and I'd love to be able to celebrate with you. I'd love to be able to share with our prayer partners, with our supporting churches, with other club leaders of saying, hey, we've had some kids make some decisions to follow Christ, or this is where kids are at. And so if you have kids that in particular you'd like for me to be praying for me to be asking others to pray for, if you have kids that come to Christ, that make an initial profession of faith, man, I'd love to hear that. I'd love to celebrate with you. I'd love to pray with you. I'd love to pray for you guys as you do that. So let me know about those things. It's not about checking boxes or saying, hey, look at us, we're succeeding because we've got X number of kids that have prayed to receive Christ. But I would like to know, kind of as you have those conversations with kids, where that's at and what's happening with that. And maybe you want to close with this song tonight of I Believe the Bible. It's sort of a fun kids club kind of song, just sort of something to kind of wrap things up at the end of your club time with that. And then the sword drill sheets are in your folder. And with the sword drill sheets, let me just walk you through these real quick because there's a couple of key important things that I want you to recognize in here. One is that you do need some supplies, and you'll notice it says mystery color. In the shoebox that has your materials, you should find for each memory verse group, you're going to have at least one set of mystery color sheets. Now, I know there's some clubs that are doing fewer groups than you were before. Some are doing more. If you need more of these, let me know that. Also, take a look at it ahead of time. Make sure all the pieces are there. I didn't have a chance to go through every one of these bags. I did notice there were a few that, just as I looked at them, I'm like, oh, there's pieces missing here. And so I tried to pull those out and make sure you got ones that have the pieces that you need. But hopefully that's the case. But the way this works is inside your big Ziploc bag, you're going to find some smaller bags and smaller things. There's a gold pouch. Some of the pouches aren't all gold, but many of them are. And then you're going to find a little Ziploc baggie with some small pieces and some big pieces, just colored squares. And so with those, what you're going to do is you're going to take one of these colored small squares and put it into the golden pouch. But don't let kids see what color, or maybe you want to put two colors into there, however you want to do it. Don't let them see what colors you put in, or for that matter, what colors you don't put in. The big pieces you're going to put out on a table. And the idea is that as you do the sword drills, as they get them right, maybe divide into 2 teams or 3 teams, or however you want to do that. They're going to grab a big square, and they'll just start making a pile of squares for their team. And then in the end, you're going to count up, scoring, but the squares that are the same color as the squares in the pouch are worth more points. And so in the end, you'll kind of have this competition, see who wins, but they get extra points if they have the color that's in the pouch. And so a little bit of it is kind of luck of the draw, and so you can kind of play that, and you can feel free to do as many rounds of that as time allows for you to do that. But then the other thing that I want to call your attention to is right at the top of that it says we will use this again in January. And so make sure that when you're done with these, you get them back together, back in the bag, because in January, we're going to use these same pieces to do this same game once again. And so just be aware of that's coming. You're going to use these in December, and then you'll use them again in January. So you'll want to hang on to the pieces, keep them together so that you can use them again when the time comes for that. And so that should give you everything that you need to know. Ordinarily, things like this would be in the folder, but because we're using it twice, I didn't put it in the folder. I put it in the shoebox. If you have questions about any of that, feel free to give me a call. Hopefully these videos are still helpful. I know several people have said they watch them, that they benefit from them, and so I'm going to continue to keep making them. I enjoy doing it. I enjoy creating them. And this gives me a chance to kind of walk through and experience the materials that I'm giving to you as well, and sometimes find things that need to be fixed or see what works or doesn't. So it's actually good for me, and I just have fun. I actually get to teach the lessons, which is what I enjoy doing, even though I don't actually get to do that. So hopefully these are helpful to you. If there's things you'd like to see included, if you'd like to see these videos look different, let me know. I'd be happy to make whatever edits or changes so that these can be more helpful to you.